Igor Stravinsky, the famous Russian romantic music composer, once said about music that he was questioned from someone and was whether they liked it or not. They asked him, "Do you like this piece or not?" And his response was, "Music is not a question of like, it's a question of appreciation." Good evening, card chargers. In this episode of Cincinnati Kid, we're going to talk about something that's pretty near and dear to me and has been on my mind for, in retrospect, for the last several weeks, and I'm thinking about putting together this episode. And it's about nostalgia. And I have to give a huge shout out to YouTube hobby content creator, Hall of Famer, Terry from T-Mac's Nostalgia channel, and for a huge influence on what I'm about to share with you this evening. I also want to give a shout out to a podcast that I've started to listen to lately. And this individual, just like Terry, uses cards as a means to think about things that are bigger than just the cards and just the hobby. And that would be none other than Rabbi David Spinrad, sorry, butchered his name. Sorry, Rabbi Dave, from the Rated Rabbi podcast. I'll put their links below for Terry and for Rabbi Dave. Please go watch their channels or listen to their podcast. It's been instrumental in my journey here with cards and as a content creator. So the year was 1981. And that year was quite a year. As you see up here behind in the backdrop, my two favorite bands released two of their classic albums in that year, Rush's Moving Pictures and U2's October. Those are my two favorite bands, and don't ask me how they don't seem to match or work together. They're just a real definition of who I am as a person, as reflected in their music, I guess. They just struck a chord with me. Another thing that was huge in 1981 was Raiders of the Lost Ark. And at the risk of this video being pulled down because of copyright violations, I did not put up my copy of the Raiders of the Lost Ark on DVD. That movie was huge for me at that point in my life, as was my Little League playing days, which were winding down in 1981. Truth be told, I was a terrible baseball player. I actually didn't quite much care to play the sport. I may share a little more about that in a future video, but that's not really important. What's important was how I felt as a person during that time, and how I felt as a fan of baseball and a fan of sports and a fan of cards. And I've mentioned very little of it before, but I've shown this card before. And this card here, I might as well go ahead and put up a stand here. This card here was one I got out of a cereal box, and it was really easy to think how cool it was with the 3D effect. You can kind of look at it there. But it's the player that's on there. That was the thing. Again, I only collected cards in that era and had a stack. Probably my entire stack of cards was probably not as tall as this stack of card holders. And they're only from the 1980 Topps and an 81 Donruss and Topps. And you take a look at that Carl Yastrzemski card there, and man, did I get a lot of Yastrzemski cards. And as a kid growing up in the Midwest, in the days before internet and so forth, I mean, I didn't follow the sport that closely. I kept getting these cards of Carl Yastrzemski. I also had, at one point in time, his 81 Donruss, the one with the green border where he's at the plate batting. And I looked at that card and I didn't like, who is Carl Yastrzemski? It's just, don't know. And he seemed like an older guy, and it seemed like, well, there wasn't really too much that I could read up about him that was readily available. Again, no internet, no social media back then. I couldn't quickly look at a YouTube video. Archived video of games was at the mercy of the networks, whether they wanted to play them or not. But I knew that I really wanted a card of this guy. And I opened pack after pack. Like I said, I got 3 or 4. I think I got more than one of these 81 Topps Yastrzemskis, and I just didn't care. I didn't care for him. I wanted Pete Rose. And I wanted any Pete Rose card. And so the one I traded for finally, I think I got hosed because I didn't know what I had, and I had some pretty good players also. I'm trying to remember, like a Jim Palmer. I think I had Joe Morgan. I don't think I traded Joe Morgan, but I did trade some other players that were pretty good to get this 81 Donruss Pete Rose. And not this particular one. My copy was one that was, I mean, creased to an inch of its life. The creasing sort of started here in the center, just below his zippy, where the zip is, and just spidered out like a spider all over the card. This card had been well abused by whoever owned it before, and I gave up some pretty fresh cards for it. But I had a Pete Rose card, and this was my only Pete Rose card that I had. This is a copy of it. And so you ask yourself, here I am with both of these cards. I don't think that's going to work. And it's sort of like, well, what happened to the Yastrzemski? What happened to all my cards from that time? Well, I had them all in a box with other cards I had started to acquire when I got back into hobbying in the early 2000s. And that's when I started kind of going for vintage cards. I also opened some newer packs of cards as well from that era, because there were still some players that I followed from the start of their careers that I really liked in the early 2000s. And it was sort of like almost a 20-year later reunion of that 1981 year. And I was sort of like in the mindset of, these cards aren't vintage cards. A lot of people cut off at 1980. I didn't really realize that rule back then, but I did notice that it seemed as if 81 and later cards were just not worth much to people. And I let that become my mindset with these cards. So I had them all boxed up, and because of a situation that I don't wish to talk about here, I had to box a lot of my cards up and give them over to a friend to hold for me for a while. And I only kept with me in a couple of safe deposit boxes some much more valuable, monetarily valuable vintage cards, like my 55 Koufax rookie and a few others, my Marshall rookie and so forth, that I viewed in my mind at that time as much more important. And this would have been roughly 7, 8 years ago. Well, his house burned down, and I think those cards got lost, burned up in it. And I'm hoping to do an interview with him at some point, maybe later this summer on the effect of what happened to his house and what that meant to him as a baseball card collector, because he was the one that was really instrumental. My friend Steve, I won't disclose his last name. And no, it's not Vintage Card Steve, even though he's my friend too, but shout out to his channel here. That's, it's a local Steve that got me into vintage card collecting, and it's a real tragedy. He lost some of his collection, and I think those cards are lost. But I'm hoping to do a video on that sometime in the future, where I interview him and talk to him about what it meant and what it means to him to be a collector and what he's been able to save and salvage. But there are some from that era that survived. Not this one. This was that I did not put in that box. This was a recent store pickup, or sorry, card show pickup. 81 Robin Yount. I don't think I ever had this card originally. I might have had his 81 Fleer, or I mean his 81 Donruss instead, if he had one. I don't remember now. Or maybe I had his 80 Tops. I don't recall. But a few of them have survived, and some of them you saw before that were really important to me. It's former Reds, current and then former Reds. This George Foster I've shown before. This is from my original pull from as a kid. And this one, which was featured on TJ Maxx's recent video that he had. And because of that video, I'm thinking about getting this one graded, even though I would have never considered it before, just from purely the nostalgia effect. And that card, when I saw it, really influenced me to talk about 1981. That was a big time transition year in our country's history. Ronald Reagan was just taking office as his first term as our president. The Iran hostage crisis had ended. We were in the height of the Cold War. Coming down to the end of it, the death struggle of it, between the United States and the Soviet Union. And there seems to be some retrospective reflection of that, sort of history repeating itself again. Even though they don't call themselves the Soviet Union anymore, that just sometimes old enemies become your new enemies. And when it came down to it, I thought rookie cards of any era would be the cards that would be the ones to keep. So, on a funny note, not only did I keep one Harold Baines rookie card, no offense to Harold Baines, he was a great DH, but just because he's in the Hall of Fame, I kept two, and both of these were original ones that I pulled. I don't think these would grade very high, but it's nostalgia. Those uniforms for the White Sox in that era, a bit head scratching, but hey, they took the risk and gave it a try. But there you go. That card, these cards, I love the green border. I love the green grass of the practice field that they're at, and the blue sky. Those are all checks for me for great card. And I've heard questions about his legitimacy in the Hall of Fame. Well, someone thought he was worthy. So there you go. Next off, and I forgot to pull them out, so I'm going to have to get up here and get them. I'll keep talking. Is for David M. Great channel. If I can find them. We're going to switch to hockey. 1981 hockey. Now, where I grew up, it was sort of borderland hockey country. You would get some youth hockey. You would definitely be able to watch a minor league hockey team play. And a particular minor league hockey team had this guy for about half a season. The one in my hometown. For you hockey buffs out there, you're going to know that city almost immediately. He ended up with the Oilers because they were a minor league team at the time that sort of got regulated up into the NHL. And the team he was on, they left. I don't know. I can't say it was the worst trade ever. Because it might not have been a trade. I don't even know what the transaction was. Maybe David M. or another real big-time hockey guy in the hobby here can comment below on what actually happened. But he went from that team that was in my hometown to Edmonton, and the rest is history. And here is his O-Pee-Chee from 1981. I did not have this card or any hockey cards originally, but this era of hockey was one of my favorite. I wouldn't say per much that I was like an Oilers fan and I was just a hockey fan. And I would go to some of these minor league games. I never saw him play for them, but I did see some games after he was there. He upped the profile of this team quite a bit. Here is his record breaker card. But it's 1981. So when I was in high school, this would have been in the late 80s, Wayne Gretzky was still huge and was still with the Oilers. It was late Oilers by this point, and you would see more than one of his jerseys popping up being worn by kids at school. And this was 1,800 miles away from Edmonton. My high school was 1,800 miles away from Edmonton. The guy I really liked from that team was his sort of partner, not sidekick, but partner. Jari Kurri, Hall of Famer. I think it's just a cool, he's so young in that shot. I just think it's just a cool image of him. I love the action of these Topps cards with them on the ice. Well, actually, these are O-Pee-Chee here, but the hockey cards seem to have more while they're in ice, and they must have been using high-speed film and huge lenses and stuff to capture that kind of image from 1981. But I love that Oilers insignia down there. And Jari Kurri was a Finnish player and from Finland, and one of the few ones from Finland in the league. And back then, of course, Finland was part of the Eastern Bloc in Europe. The Cold War still on. Finland was one of those countries that was kind of a loose member. They really weren't part of the Warsaw Pact, and they really didn't care for the Russians that much. In World War II, those two squared off, and the Finns gave the Russians more than they could bargain for. But Jari Kurri, great player. Nostalgia. Even though that's 40 years ago, some of the times almost seem like yesterday. Some of the memories almost seem like yesterday. I just want to give another quick shout out to Old Sarge Collects. You can see down here, Got a little soldier form there. He recently put out a video that has a recollection of his 1-year anniversary of doing videos on YouTube, and I wanted to congratulate him and look forward to many more great videos coming from him and the insight he gives the hobby. I will put his below his channel link as well. Thank you so much. If you're still hanging with me at the 20-minute mark, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for your subscriptions and comments and even thumbs ups. I'm very grateful. My previous video on Roberto Clemente has gotten over 100 views, and to me that is a success. I feel very blessed and really happy if I'm getting 100 views on a video. If I got no views, it would still be fun to do this, but I feel very satisfied with what's going on and the hobby on this channel and other people's channels, and I hope to continue to contribute to other people's channels and put out better content here as the summer rolls on and spring. Nostalgia. The power of it is tremendous. Don't ever forget it. Reflect back yourself now. I'd love to see what you guys come up with videos, or maybe something that's nostalgic to you from a certain time period or a certain set or a certain card, a certain musician. Please share it. I'd love to see it. Until then, I'm heading for the highway. Take care.